are two reasons you are here. One, you played the first
Space Marine!
and want that nostalgic kick and refresher before the long-awaited sequel comes out. Two, you never played or heard of the first
Space Marine!
and are considering trying it before the game that's apparently a sequel comes out. Either way, you've come to the right place. If you want to skip my obligatory lore dump, jump to the time code on the screen, or if you're into that, let's break it down! Gaming in the Xbox 360 and PS3 era was a wild time. In arguably the last big technological leap we would ever experience, many games were defined in a way that we would still enjoy today. First-person shooters, open-world RPGs, superhero games, third-person games, all were crafted in a way that the previous console generation just couldn't handle on a technological level. But with each genre comes one game that does it best, and inspires dozens of other studios to put their twist on the respective genre. That also goes for Relic Entertainment, which developed the game I'm looking back on for this specific video. Obviously. Released in 2011 on the Xbox 360, PS3 and PC, competition was running wild in the third-person shooter genre, brother. It seemed like every week a new over-the-shoulder blaster would release, and standing out from the overabundance of these games was no small feat. The developer behind the popular Dawn of War RTS series, Relic Entertainment, would take on this task. And what better shoulder to put the camera over than the coolest shoulders in the biz they were oh so familiar with. The frickin'
Space Marine!
Before I talk about the game itself, I will start by saying I never read any of the books. And before,
Space Marine!
I only played the Fire Warrior demo on the PS2, and the first Dark Omen and Dawn of War RTS games on the PC. I have little knowledge of the tabletop games, and was more of a Warcraft 2 and 3 fan anyway.
Heresy!
But my brother had this one little miniature of a blue dude with a gun and massive shoulder pads, and my interest was immensely piqued. The striking blue-yellow coloring, the glowing red eyes, the massive frame, that awesome shoulder armor. This was sick as fuck. When Dawn of War released, I was all over it. Still an insanely awesome RTS that you should definitely still play, by the way. I grew fond of the 40K universe, more so than the medieval side of the brand. After the second game, hype levels were through the roof. And then the 2009 E3 trailer dropped, and good God almighty.
Bing, bang, boom. Talk about a river of ejaculate. Now I know what those sad villagers of Pompeii felt like. Except where they were rained down on hot lava, I rained down on those villagers with frothy ejaculate.
Described as a Gears of War hack and slash,
Space Marine!
did stand out from the many third-person shooters of that time by focusing largely on melee combat. The developer spoke about the comparisons to Gears on many occasions, stating that, well,
Space Marines!
don't get to cover. They go forward and destroy the opposition. I, for the life of me, couldn't find this clip of them saying it, but I remembered it, so I'm sure it happened.
You know, certainly you take a look at the two games and you see some similarities sort of on the superficial way, but as soon as you have the controller in your hands, you understand that Space Marine is a completely different experience. We also have chosen to not have a snap to cover system, which is sort of going to be a key differentiator for us, because pretty much every third-person action game has that right now. And the reasons for that are two. There's really two main reasons. One is that it was really not compatible with our desire to have a very seamless, kind of immediate feeling, satisfying melee system in our game. But the second part is more related to the IP, and again, it always goes back to delivering the core fantasy of being in a Space Marine, where you're this 7-foot-tall sort of superhuman soldier encased in armor and having, you know, with these devastating weapons at your disposal, and you know, you stride onto the battlefield with confidence. You've got, you know, very conspicuous, you're blue and gold, and your enemies see you coming from afar, and you inspire fear in their hearts. And it's really all about that experience, being surrounded at all times, taking fire from all directions, and just dominating through force of arms.
Even though they never go into cover ever was sounding very plausible and exciting, it didn't really turn out that way, especially on the higher difficulties, but more on that later. Being a massive fan of Gears of War, the design of the
Space Marines!
surely being a part of that, I was excited as all hell to play it. They released a common thing during that era that is mostly lost nowadays, called a demo. And man, I was hyped even more. Alright, enough chit chat, let's talk about the game itself. The game follows the exploits of a squad of 3 genetically engineered, 1,000-pound biologically enhanced 7-foot Ultramarines, led by Captain Titus. I guess Ultramarine was a less marketable name. And I agree on that. There's something cool about the name
Space Marine!
They're sent to the Forge World Graia, Forge Worlds being planet-sized factories, that is being invaded by the orcs that have their eyes set on a Titan Invictus, a giant mech that is built to destroy planets. Their job is to eradicate the orc forces and secure said mech. Of course, there are complications and the occasional twist that you might see coming if you're familiar with the lore. I wasn't, and although I expected shenanigans from the quite obvious source, the way in which it unfolded was a nice twist in itself. The story is nothing groundbreaking, but it is enjoyable, and that's what's most important. The same thing applies to pretty much everything in this game.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, of course not.
Let's go over the graphics while we're at it. You've seen the gameplay by now. This was all captured on the 360, because besides my older PC running the game flawlessly, my new beefed up device refused to launch the Anniversary Edition.
Computer says no.
So much for the PC Master Race angle. I never played the 360 version besides the demo, so why the hell not? Nothing wrong with some extra achievements. So if the image is a little blurry, you know the reason. The game still looks good. It didn't look amazing back then, but not bad either, just good. Despite suffering from the same affliction many games had back in the 7th generation, being muddled brown and grey colors, it still displays some cool looking vistas and environments. Sure, the color palette suits a planet-sized factory, but they did try adding some different hues here and there, and looks fine for the most part. Most buildings seem to have 3 extra stories on top of them, to make it all look that little bit larger in scope. The models themselves look great, especially the armors, which look fan-frickin-tastic. If I have to criticize one thing really though, is that the main characters all seem to have near identical facial models, with minor differences in between. I don't know if there's anything in the lore regarding this, but they could all be related as far as I know. The orcs and goblins look dope though, with some of them meshing with mechanical parts after I assume many battles requiring a patch-up. Well, count on our squad to make it their last, because hot damn! You're gonna mess some green dudes up. The combat is weighty and impactful, and definitely the star of the show here. You've got quite a few weapons to choose from blasters to the classic bolt gun, plasma shotgun, sniper rifles and grenade launchers, to exotic weapons like the laser rifle and the obligatory mounted turrets. Van Ellington tip: if you find the melta gun, keep it in your inventory at all times. it evaporates the opposition. They all have a rewarding impact when hit, but none of them quite like the melee part of the combat. You start with a knife, but quickly obtain one of, if not the coolest weapon in all of lore ever, the chainsword. A sword combined with a chainsaw? Damn! You'll be needing this instrument of destruction quite a lot, because the opposition can be brutal. You can keep the green forces at bay for as long as possible, but there will inevitably come a time where there are just too many. So there's only one option. Charge in, scream, "For the Emperor!" and have at them. Luckily, it feels good to hack and tear, because you'll be doing a lot of it. As a matter of fact, you'll have to, as it's the only way to regain health. You got a shield that replenishes after a time, which was the norm back then, so that's nice. But if you want to keep in tip-top shape, executions is where it's at. Bigger enemies can be executed after a certain amount of damage, but most enemies need to be stunned after a whacking. There's a combo system in place, which is mostly an attack followed by the stun attack, with a maximum of 3 attacks and a stun. That last one is always a joy, as the action slows down to enjoy the explosion of violence. Executions are treated the same way, and they never got old for me. Once you have the option to swap your chainsword for a power axe, the excitement restarts, as the animations are different once more, and the combos feel distinct enough. Things really take a turn once you get access to the jump pack and the accompanying Thunder. This monstrosity is so massive, even the Ultramarines can only wield this with a pistol or bolt gun. So it's up to you whether to accept this limitation or stick to the mightiest weapon of all. Especially the first time when enemies are somewhat weak, it's a no-brainer. At later stages, the payoff might not be worth it, especially without the jump pack, but let's stay hyped for a minute longer. The feeling of getting high in the air and smashing down on the ground is exhilarating to say the least. The hammer is insanely powerful and feels immensely satisfying to use. Sure, it feels like cheesing to hop into the air and continue to smash down the opposition, only to execute a single enemy to replenish health and jump back up again, but hey, victory at any cost. During the course of the campaign, you get access to upgrades as well, ranging from better shields to upgraded weapons. You can only have 4 weapons at a time, 1 for each category, but there's plenty of opportunity to swap them out, should you feel the need to switch things up. Besides the combat feeling great, and movement overall, you really feel like a hulking beast when running around, feeling and hearing the weight of every step. There are some noticeable negatives in the gameplay loop. For starters, once you get low on health, you need to execute someone. There will come a time when you're frantically hacking away and the camera gets all over the place and you start to combo out of the group of enemies. Since there is no lock-on button, this can be a little bit frustrating. It's no deal breaker, but some ranged enemies have a tendency to keep running away. I mean, wouldn't you if a 7-foot, 1,000-pound behemoth with a revving chainsword ran after you? But this risks your squad mates killing them before you can deliver the final blow. But Van Hellington, why do you wait with execution when there's only one left? Well, one other problem is that even though you're in an execution animation, you still receive damage and can die during it. This is less likely to occur on the normal difficulty, but on higher ones, the later enemies can hit like a truck, or a dozen trucks at the same time. And especially once the mortar orcs appear, it can be particularly frustrating.
Whoa!
Orc rocket launchers on the high ground.
Better crippled in body. body and corrupting mind.
On the other hand though, when you do hit the execution at the last possible second, it feels rewarding as hell. Sometimes battles can be a bit hectic and health is starting to dwindle. But just as hope starts to fade, you can unleash your righteous fury and beat the imperial shit out of everyone for a small amount of time, getting health regeneration and a big damage boost. If you use it while aiming, you get bullet time, which can be quite handy to take out a row of snipers or the aforementioned mortars in one go. Personally, I tend to save it for when a group of big boys show up, but in the first half of the game, you can use it when ready. It charges up reasonably fast too, so hack away, I say. I mentioned the no needing to get into cover at the start of this video, and while this was in line with the lore, as far as I know, in actuality it would behoove you to hide behind a wall every now and then and rid some fools of their life by means of sniping. You can die very quickly if you're not careful on higher difficulties, but I guess the dev statement somewhat applies if you're playing on the lowest of difficulty, which is the most relaxing way to play, and not at all shameful to the Empire.
Traitor.
Oh, and I must also mention that the sound is on point as well. Voice acting is top notch, with Mark Strong voicing Captain Titus, but the rest does a great job as well.
Inquisitor Drogon?
I am Drogon. And you are?
Captain Titus of the Ultramarines. We received your distress call, but you seem to have weathered the enemy's attack.
I am soldier and scientist, both, Captain.
Orcs and the rest sound dope, with a distinct Cockney accent to set them apart from the ones in Warcraft.
Space Marine! Was that supposed to hurt? My boys want to give you a proper greeting! Space Marine! You trying to steal my titans? Steal my loot? I'll rip your guts right out your throat!
But as you might have heard throughout this video, expect to hear the same amount of
Space Marine!
throughout the game. Guns sound heavy, the chainsaw has a lovely revving sound, and the Thunderhammer sounds and feels just like you want and expect it to.
Kill the Space Marines! Surprise me into battle!
I really enjoyed the variety in the gameplay, which is not something you'd expect in a game like this. Mixing long-range combat with melee is not something we've seen a lot of back then, and the added gameplay of the jump pack really added to the enjoyment. Sure, there's the obligatory turret section, but in this case it does add to the variety in a way that is welcoming. The different chapters also mix these in at a sporadic pace, so that they never got repetitive for me. There are some nice set pieces as well, and while there are obviously some cutscenes, they never keep you away from the action too long, ensuring your adrenaline is always at a steady level. I might also point out that adding in a train section is always a plus. I really can't name a train level that was a detriment to a game. Let me know in the comments if you can, however. And while you're at it, leave a like and subscribe. But don't do it for me, do it
For the glory of the Imperium!
As was tradition in that era, almost every game was required to have a multiplayer component.
Space Marine!
Was no exception. I played it quite a bit back then, loved it, and couldn't wait to hop back in for some nostalgic ass-kicking. Unfortunately, as expected, no one plays on the 360 anymore. And well, as I said earlier,
Computer says no.
so alas, other people's footage will have to make do. And while looking for footage, the amount of people still playing on PC in 2024 was surprising. It's a unique experience, made more so unique by the incredible amount of customization you had for your
Space Marine!
As I was scrubbing through the footage, I found myself once again giddy at the thought of creating as many variations as I could. I remember having this sick spawn color scheme I was rocking and massacring fools with. It was glorious! From what I remember was that the jump pack was a little overpowered, but I also faintly remember killing one of them was immensely satisfying. The emphasis was also a lot more on the shooting side of things instead of the melee combat the single player did so well. Either way, the game offered a solid selection of modes that kept me hooked for quite some time. Well, at least until Gears of War 3 came out, a mere 2 weeks later. Why would they release it mere weeks apart? It's a head scratcher for sure. I'm sure it was played a little longer on PlayStation 3, but odds are, Gears cleared out most lobbies on the Xbox 360 when it launched. Which is a shame, because
Space Marine
was a very fun shooter. When it came to sales, it sold over 1.2 million copies, which was pretty decent 13 years ago. Even THQ's Brian Farrell stated it exceeded their expectations, so a sequel was sure to have been in the works. Apparently, all funding in THQ went to the horribly timed U-Draw, whatever the hell it was called, and it eventually destroyed the company pretty much from what I've gathered, effectively ending the development of many of my favorite franchises. Which ones, you may ask? Well, how about Darksiders, the WWE games, and the UFC Undisputed series? Darksiders 3 was okay, and I've got hopes for the recently announced Darksiders game, which may or not be 4, we'll find out. WWE games have been shit to mediocre, and EA resurrected their should've stayed dead EA MMA engine to ruin another great series. But I digress. In closing,
Space Marine!
it's a fun game. It's one of those swimming in sevens kind of game.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. Not at all.
No, not at all indeed. This might seem weird, but oftentimes I enjoy the games in the 70s to low 80s a lot more than the supposed near perfection games. There's not a lot of pretentious douche canoe energy surrounding it, and they don't have a lot of pressure on their shoulders. Or pauldrons in this case. I saw the reviews back then, the low scores they gave the game, and while I agreed to some extent, I also thought to myself, hey, I'm hyped for this game. The demo was fun, the multiplayer looks cool, let's give it a go. And this is not slander against game journos, but fuck most of them, especially nowadays. If you're hyped for a game, play it, decide for yourself. If you're unsure, wait for a sale. Anyways, the long-awaited sequel is coming out in a few weeks, or is out by the time you're watching this. And if you're wondering, Van Hellington, should I still buy the first one? My answer is simple. Sure, it's on sale on Steam quite often. You can get it for $10 or even less. Regrettably, it's not remastered for console, which is baffling to me, honestly. Hell, I would have bought it instantly. It's also not backwards compatible, but if you still have a 360 or PS3 lying about, dust that sumbitch off and give it a try. You'll be done in under 8 hours easily, but it's a damn fun time. Alright, I've taken enough of your time already. If you liked the video, hit a like and subscribe and all that good stuff. If any of you have played this and have a different opinion, let me know down below how wrong you are. Ooh, if you have an idea where to start with 40k books, I would be ever so grateful. Alright, thanks for watching, and let's get hyped for the sequel.
Space Marine!